Now, first up, we know that ADHD and anxiety are related to each other, rather strongly, in fact. In childhood, children with ADHD have about a 20 to 25% risk of developing an anxiety disorder. But when followed up to adulthood, or when we see adults who are self-referred to clinical practices in adulthood, we see that the relationship is as high as 45 to 50% of those adults with ADHD have an anxiety disorder by adulthood. So something's going on between ADHD and anxiety, and especially over time and development between these two disorders, that we need to take a closer look at. It's an interesting relationship, to some extent bidirectional, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. So, is there a relationship? Clearly there is. High rate of comorbidity. Why? Well, let's understand that ADHD, of course, leads to its own symptoms of inattention, primarily distractibility, but also poor concentration, poor follow-through on tasks, forgetfulness in getting things done on a daily basis. But ADHD's inattention is primarily outwardly directed. The individual is overly coupled to and engaged with environmental events. That's an important distinction, as you'll see in a moment. And of course, ADHD is related to its hyperactive and impulsive symptoms. So this is pretty straightforward stuff here that you can find in the DSM-5. Now, what you may not recall is that ADHD also has about a 50% overlap with another attention disorder. So while they're not the same, they are often comorbid, and that is cognitive disengagement syndrome, what used to be called sluggish cognitive tempo, or SCD, now renamed in 2022 as CDS. But in any case, the inattention that occurs in CDS is very different. The individual is overly engaged with or coupled with mental events, as in daydreaming, mind-wandering, rumination. And during these periods of excessive internally preoccupied attention, the individual is often somewhat hypoactive, sluggish to respond, and may indeed make more errors in processing information because they're not engaged with the environment, and so they'll make mistakes when it comes to questions about what happened around them. So CDS is more internally preoccupied, ADHD externally preoccupied. I hope that helps you. Now, when we look at ADHD's connection to anxiety, we can see that, as I've said, over time, people with ADHD become increasingly likely to develop anxiety and its disorders, especially social phobias, but other anxiety problems as well. And the longer ADHD goes untreated across time, and this includes adults, the greater the odds at follow-up that they will have an anxiety disorder. So ADHD appears to be contributing to the risk for anxiety. There's a causal relationship here to some extent, not perfectly, because you can have anxiety disorders without ADHD. But ADHD, when it's present, certainly increases the odds you're going to develop anxiety symptoms and possibly an anxiety disorder, and most likely social phobia. Now, when ADHD links up with anxiety and its symptoms, we often see that it's the cognitive disengagement symptoms that anxiety is most related to. Even when it doesn't occur with ADHD, CDS is the most likely attention disorder that goes with anxiety. And when anxiety and ADHD team up together, we also see much greater impairments in daily life activities. There's also an increasing risk for suicide. That's often because anxiety goes with depression, and depression increases suicidal thinking, and the impulsivity of ADHD increases the likelihood of a suicide attempt. Also, recent research shows that where ADHD and anxiety coexist, there's a small but elevated risk of developing schizophrenia in that subset of individuals.